Hello and welcome to Life's Nuggets with Susan and Patricia. My name is Patricia and I am a mindset coach.
And I'm Susan, and I'm a nutritionist and lifestyle coach.
So we have what I think is a really interesting topic today. We're talking about perimenopause and menopause, and we've been talking a lot about this lately.
Mhm.
And Susan, I'm in menopause. I've been in menopause for 10 years,
Yeah.
maybe more. And I've been learning from you so much more about what is actually happening to my body, even now, this many years after, and starting to figure out kind of what it was all about and what it still is about. And I think so many women are looking for this information so because they just don't know.
Mm.
So with your background as a nurse and as a nutritionist, why don't we start with, okay, what is the definition? Because I've heard different definitions of the difference between perimenopause and menopause. Go.
Yeah, well, there is a huge difference. And I think we hear a lot of talk about menopause, and perimenopause is kind of a sideline, right? When in fact, if we think about what the word menopause means, it actually means a pause in our menses, right? Menses is the
Right.
Latin for menstruation. Right? So
Right.
menopause essentially is saying that your menses are paused, they're stopped, and you won't be menstruating anymore, right? Perimenopause means around the menopause area. So in fact, it's the time frame leading up to menopause. And it varies for all women as we are all different. Our genetics are different, our inflammation status is different, our lifestyles are different. So everybody is going to go through this journey in a very different way. On average, though, perimenopause can last anywhere from 5 to 10 years, right? Which again is something I think people don't realize. They think that it's the menopause that's going to last 5 to 10 years. But in fact, once you are menopaused, once you have had 1 year without menstruating, you are officially, considered to be menopaused. So
So just so
menopausal.
I am clear, sorry, Susan, just so I am
Okay.
clear. So up until the 1 year after you have stopped your period, that is still called perimenopause. And
Yeah.
then from after that first year,
Yeah.
then you're officially in menopause, and that's for the
Exactly.
rest of your life. Okay,
That's
there's different
right.
definitions on that. I
And
like
it's
that.
interesting because we talk about, the menopausal period is actually a period of about 3, 4 days when your body's really like, this is it, ladies, I'm done. We're not menstruating anymore. It's just 3, 4 days. And then you are sort of officially menopaused, right?
By 3 or 4 days, you mean three
Well,
or after that year, or
yeah, so it's after that year, you've got these 3, 4 days when your body is sort of says to itself that all the hormonal effects and things are there, and your body kind of acknowledges that it's no longer going to menstruate. It's sort of a 3, 4 day period to sort of like easing you in to the actual menopausal period. Do you
right?
see what I mean? It's
Yeah,
kind
I see
of
what
like
you
you're
mean.
landing on a runway,
At
and
that
then
1 year mark, you land at the runway, and then your body kind of says, okay, you got 3 or 4 days.
that's
And
it.
you're done, sister.
You're done. This is it, right? This is exactly what it is. You have those 3 or 4 days. Internally, everything's happening. We don't necessarily realize it
Yeah.
unless you're marking it on a calendar, and then you are considered menopause. So I think, when we are looking at these transition phases, and I feel, in researching this, it's interesting even just to look at sort of culturally how we view this, right? Some women view the perimenopause leading up to being menopaused as a sort of like oh, I don't know, like a loss. Oh, I'm less of a woman. I'm, because I'm not menstruating anymore, my role in society is going to change. I'm going to become unseen, right?
Mhm.
And if we look to Asian cultures, and more traditional indigenous cultures, even here in Canada, those women that are menopaused are considered wise, are considered sages. They really embrace this next stage of their life, right? They're in a period of their life where they can sort of reinvent themselves. They have all that life experience that they can actually use to do it. So why not? Right. And I really feel, and I think you do that too. I've really felt that. And I'm really like, yeah, this is a good stage to be in. Like the perimenopause, not so fun.
Yeah.
Right? I can go back there. You could be,
Menopause is good though.
this is
I
it.
don't I don't mind it. There's no more hassles, no more no more having to pack extra stuff and blah
This is
blah
it.
blah.
Right, and wonder what's going to happen. And oh, I'm not going to feel too good on those days. But I think, if we sort of switch it back and, I think through the conversation, we'll be going to both phases because obviously they're linked. You can't be menopaused without going through perimenopause. And you know that when you start perimenopause, the destination is menopause. So, either way.
Right.
Um, but I think to gain an understanding, especially for women, we are talking about it more, but a lot of not even symptoms, because I said it's a phase in our life, it's not a disease. So a lot of I don't know, what was it we called them the other night? Clues, that sort of come about, the hot flushes, the skin dryness, the mood changes, you know, unfortunately, our society sees that as something to be dealt with. So many women in their 40s, where they go and see a doctor, one of the first things they'll often say is, oh, that sounds like you're depressed. And the woman is just not depressed, but she's having such a hard time managing, these things that are changing because we're working, we're looking after homes, and then you throw on this perimenopause. It's like, no wonder women are tired and confused. And so often, doctor says, oh, you're depressed. And it's not, it's just their hormones are literally wreaking havoc on their own bodies, right? The balance that we had treasured for sort of 20, 30 years through our different cycles, with your estrogen going up at the beginning of your cycle, which leads to the release of the egg, and then you have your progesterone that comes up. So they both sort of go up, peak, come down, and then the progesterone goes up, peaks, and comes down. That balance is lost. And it's that balance that throws us,
Um,
right?
I think also, not only are women talking about this more, but I think some of the reasons that people are struggling through perimenopause is that we have more and more women who are having
Mm.
children later in life. So they're
Yeah.
going through perimenopause with younger kids. I think
Mm-hmm.
it depends on where you're at. So for me, I was trying to have children. I met my husband when I was 40, and prior to that, no marriage, no kids. And so and for the same for him, we both wanted to have kids. So we
Yeah.
tried to have kids in my early 40s. And I ended up with a miscarriage, and it felt like I was shoved into perimenopause because all of a sudden my cycles were all over the place and everything. Doctors didn't know, fertility
Oh
doctors
my
did
gosh.
not know. It was very, very frustrating. So it was a very emotional time for me because I couldn't get answers, and we were trying to have children, and we ended up having to just let go of that. But it was a really, really frustrating time. But the more I hear about it, the more I understand what you're going through in
Yeah.
perimenopause,
Yeah.
I'm realizing that I was actually going through some
Yeah.
stuff that I had no idea I was
Thank you.
going through,
Yeah.
even in my late 30s already.
Yeah.
You had mentioned gut health. I
Yeah.
used I used to get all sorts of like nauseous
Yeah.
late at night. And I was thinking I have food sensitivities, I have this, I have that. Like, why do I feel fine all day? And then at night, I'm not starting to feel well. And you said that is also a clue.
Yeah. 100%. Think about it this way. Hormones are chemical messengers in the body, right? So they're released in one part of the body, they travel through, they reach another area, and they deliver a message which has an impact, and it sets a chain of events in place. That's what hormones are. right? That's why we kind of call them chemical messengers, right? And estrogen, which is a hormone now that we are discovering, is not just important for women's reproductive health, but it's important for our brain health. It's important for our gut health. You know, it's important for just about every single um,
Yeah.
system in the body, right? It has an impact everywhere in our body to a greater or lesser degree. And so, you know, if we kind of think of the idea that our body is constantly striving to be in balance, always, right? Whether it's our temperature, whether it's our blood pressure, if it's not in balance, our body has mechanisms to bring it back into balance. Perimenopause, there are no mechanisms really in place. So this leads to, as we said, women feeling very almost out of touch with themselves because you physically, there's things that are happening that we're just like, whoa, like this isn't normal. You know, my cycles are normally 28 days and suddenly they're 40 or they're 50 and then they go back to being 30 and I've no idea where I'm, you
Or
know,
they're
where
going
I'm
to
at.
10. I've heard lots of that where else, you know, and that happened to me too. All of a sudden you have two in like 10 days and then you don't have one for like 3 months. And it's, yeah, you don't know what is going on.
Yeah. And even
But
on an emotional point of view,
yeah, it's
right?
hard.
As we said, if we're thinking of estrogen having an effect on our brain, right? These ups and downs of estrogen as we travel through perimenopause is going to have a huge impact on our mood and how we feel and how we deal with outside stresses. And like you, I look back, I had my first hot flush when I was 39. It was wicked. Like it
Wow.
literally came overnight. I woke up and I was drenched. I'm like, what on earth is going on? And I just had a tattoo done that December. And I remember waking up thinking, oh, I've got a hepatitis C. It's like, but I'd made sure that everything was sterilized, you know, it was done in England in a proper place and everything. But my first thought was that. And it kept going on and on and on. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like I didn't think. Because even then we weren't talking about perimenopause. So menopause for me was like miles away.
I also think, you know, perimenopause, I always thought that perimenopause was something you got in your late 40s.
Right, this is it.
Never occurred to me that perimenopause can already start in your 30s. That was just crazy to me. So I found perimenopause to be hard.
Yes.
And then once we go into menopause, and I think people need to know that even after that 1 year, and correct me if I'm wrong, Susan. So even after that 1 year, where now you're officially in menopause, you can still get a period.
Yeah, you
And
can.
that's sort of a last blast kind of thing. And if you have more than that, you should be going to see a doctor, but that is normal.
Yeah.
Does that mean that once you have that extra period, let's say a year and 3 months later, do you have to start the clock all over again for the net for another year? Or I don't
It
know. It's
depends.
kind of,
There's
I don't know if
various
it's
schools of thought.
important, but
Yeah, there's schools of thought on that. Some people say yes, some people say no. It 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 depends on other symptoms, you know, on other factors too. How heavy it is, if it lasted for long, you know, if it really was a proper bleed, you know, 5, 6 days, or was it just like you said, a one-off, like a one and done kind of thing. So
yeah.
it's sort of, you know, but it's definitely, as you said, I think it's things as women, we need to be proactive for our health, right? Because as we were saying the other day, the more we talk about this, the more we make it an open conversation, to say, look, this is my body, this is how I feel, this is what I notice. Because again, the medical profession are amazing in so many ways. However, a true understanding of what's happening in the female body as we go through these transitional stage, I still feel is lacking. Like the acknowledgements of what we go through as women, um, you know, that these hormones have an impact on us, how we feel. I mean, you know, similar to you, I had a miscarriage between my two kids, and I was fine. You know, it wasn't pleasant, but I was okay. And I remember I was at a market with my husband and I was looking at some earrings and I was absolutely fine. And then all of a sudden, No explanation, Patricia. Out of nowhere, I was just in floods of tears. And this poor woman, whose earrings, beautiful earrings I was looking at, she thought I think she thought I didn't like them. And I'm trying to sort of manage this just surge of whatever it felt, the just tears, the sadness, whatever it was, while trying to sort of like, I'm sorry, it's not your ear, it's got nothing to do with that. And it sort of took 10, 15 minutes and it passed and then it was okay. But when you don't know what's happening, it's very unsettling,
It
right?
is.
I knew what was going on afterwards. I'm like, okay, I fully get it. But when it hit me, literally, I was like, what on earth is that? You know,
It's
nobody
shock.
warns you of this,
No, no, they don't. I
right?
think nobody also warns you that like once you go into menopause, um, things still are happening.
Yeah.
And like the hot flashes can continue. For
Oh, yeah.
me, it was the hot flashes and the insomnia, which I still have a certain amount of issues with today, all these years later. My mom still is having problems with hot flashes. Loving HRT. So we both are doing HRT, and I think this is something that's really interesting is that there's that fear factor that
Mm.
HRT is going to be hurtful for you. But further research is showing that it's actually
Oh,
really, like what you had mentioned earlier, that it's actually really, really healthy for you. And being on estrogen and progesterone has really, really helped. Like the
oh,
brain fog is better.
oh, yeah.
I can't remember words still. Like that's just,
Oh, yeah. I know
it's
what you
like,
mean.
my husband and I, it's like,
That
that
thing.
thing that
I
makes it,
put it over there on that
yeah.
stand.
What is that
What's
called
it
again?
called? But I think, I'd agree with you. Like I started HRT, I tried through my perimenopause, I tried all sorts of natural things, and there'd be moments where they worked pretty well, so I was happy with it. And then it got to a point where I was just like, these hot flushes, I will not live like this till the end of my days, standing in our garden in Ottawa, -30 in my bra and jeans, because I just was like, and I mean, once my husband was like, good God, we could cook an egg on you. I was just like, I don't know what yours were like, but mine, it was literally like this volcano, whoosh. Like, no.
Yeah.
Medicine has provided me with HRT and I'm loving it like you.
I
And I respect, there are people out there for health concern reasons. I do understand that it's
100%.
not for everybody, right? We're not trying to push it in any way, but I do think every woman should understand that again, barring health issues, we have choices. And I think it's important that we be aware of them and that we have to advocate for ourselves because the medical world is just not very familiar with how the female body works in all its beautiful layers and intricacies, right? It's
Yeah, and we need to do a bit of our own research. And so I know I've told you this story before, but my mom had said to me years ago, when you turn 50, go get a bone density test. So when I turned 50, go to my GP and at my annual physical and say, hey, can I have a bone density test? Sure. Well, it turns out I'm just starting osteoporosis, which, I ignore because
yeah.
that's how I deal with things. And no, I just like didn't think it was a big deal. And
Yeah.
then a couple of years later, I go and get another bone density test. Well, now I'm like mid-level osteoporosis. So now I'm starting to pay attention and realizing how freaking serious this is.
Yeah.
So my doctor sends me to a specialist, which I can't remember what that specialty is called. And I go and see this woman who basically looks at my report and says, well, you need to have like a drip and it's going to cost you X amount. I think we had to do 3 of them every 6 months for 3 of them. And you would take you like an hour or two to have this drip go into, and then you're probably going to feel sick afterwards. But I
Mm.
had done my research and I knew that estrogen would help with bone density. And so I said
100%.
to her, this woman who's older than I am, I said to her, what about estrogen? How would that work? And the specialist says to me, I don't know anything about estrogen,
This is it.
and
Yeah.
sends me back to my GP, which I'm thinking, how can you possibly be an osteoporosis specialist and not know anything about estrogen? So luckily, my doctor, who is fantastic, says, oh, yeah, we talked everything over, the research, blah, blah, blah. And she put me on it, and along with a whole bunch of supplements and food and exercise. Well, I'm now back at pre-level osteoporosis. So,
And
but nobody tells you to even
no.
check your bone density. So that's why I'm like, check your bone density.
Oh, all my female clients, Patricia, that I would say are 45 and over, always say, have you had a bone density scan done? You need, even if you don't have any issues now, you need it. You need to know your baseline.
Fine. Yeah.
Because if there's an issue 10 years down the road, you've got nothing to refer back to, right?
No.
You know,
And
if
it's
we're thinking,
scary how serious that
oh, you
can be.
fall, fractures, and
You're in big trouble. Like as you
in,
get older, falling and fracturing something or breaking like a hip or something, that
oh,
can lay out, and that's how you spend your older years. So
yeah, this is
it's
it. You want to
very
prevent
scary.
that. So I agree. You do those, you know, we need to look at our bone health. We need to look at our muscle mass. We're not looking to be men. We don't make huge amounts of testosterone, so we will never be big and bulky. But as women, we do need to be aware that our muscle mass is hugely important as we age, right? It helps to regulate our blood sugar levels. We know that through the perimenopause and menopause, especially if women have a history of type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes in their family, they're going to be much more at risk of developing it later on in life versus those that have no family history. So, you know, if there's one thing that I would like people to kind of take away is to realize that everything in our body is connected, especially as women, and it comes to menopause or perimenopause and menopause, right? So we're looking at things like hydration, right? We need to make sure we're well hydrated. We need to make sure that we keep moving, right? Using our joints. We're not meant to be sedentary. I mean, you know, if we think we have all these, you know, literally joints around our bodies, it's to be able to move in different directions and pick and lift and turn. And we barely do that now, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, using our bodies instead of sort of just sitting down is huge. I mean, I was listening to just a report this morning. Um, when we sit for huge amounts of time, our body creates inflammatory factors, right? Which
Wait,
go around the body and obviously create inflammation in different areas depending on our individual susceptibilities. Activity actually creates anti-inflammatory factors. So that's why they're saying like any movement that we can do, any activity that we do is one of the best things we can do for our health, whether it's gardening, whether it's just putting your back in a little bit more to housework,
yeah,
you know, working in your garden a little bit, but doing it in a, you know, in a slightly vigorous way, maybe
yeah,
not hours on end, but you do you know what I mean? Just
yeah.
doing,
Doing a little dancing,
that's
you
right.
know,
Why
walk
not?
around
You
the
know,
kitchen.
yeah. But it's, you know, we are very sedentary now, and we need to remember that we weren't made to do that,
Yeah.
right?
So Susan, as we kind of close off a little bit, because I mean, we could talk about this for hours,
Forever.
but so maybe what we could close off with is, first of all, there's a lot more clues and things that happen to us, and because everybody is different,
It's
they're
all
going to show differently. For some people, emotionally, they really struggle.
over.
There's physical problems, there's, all sorts of things. So do your research, and if something's really off, check, see if you can figure it out. But I guess my final thing for you, Susan, is even during these stages, like the perimenopause, where everything is so much more,
Yeah.
it feels like it was more severe in perimenopause than in menopause.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, but nutrition,
Nutrition is
because you're talking about keeping the progesterone and the estrogen in balance, and
everything.
you're kind of, this is happening. So are there different foods, or different things that we can do to try and level out,
Yeah.
fix those levels so they're a bit more in balance while we're going through this, to try and and handle what is happening to our bodies.
Yeah. I would say one of the base things that we can do, which is the foundation for anybody, but especially in perimenopause, is to make sure that our blood sugars are in balance, right? Meaning that they go up and down as they should, and not having these sort of huge peaks of energy and then sort of crashing and peaks and crashing. Because a lot of people, especially as we go through menopause, you're busy, you're not paying attention to it, you grab food on the go, you eat here, you eat there, and that is not conducive to regulating our blood sugar levels, because as soon as those are out of whack, it creates more inflammation in the body, therefore it affects our hormonal production. So again, everything's connected. So one of the first things to do is to make sure that you're trying as best as possible to eat food that does not contain too many refined and highly processed sugars, right? Because that will hugely impact your hormonal levels. We want to make sure that we are going to more nutrient dense food. So just, I would say, proper food, eating well, eating things like legumes, lentils, things like that, really opting for whole grains, fish, meat, trying to keep the highly processed things as far away as you can. It's obviously not always an option, but just being aware of it, right? Because the more we eat, sort of like going back to eating sort of 3 meals a day with maybe a snack in between, a snack being an apple, some nuts, a banana, not necessarily a snack bar from the store, which is loaded up in sugars that we don't know about. It's really going back to those simple things that may seem very basic, but that can actually have a huge impact, right? So it's kind of looking at that. It's looking at your hydration, making sure, again, because as well with the hot flushes and the sweat and the heat, we need to make sure that we're really hydrated. Maybe adding in some electrolytes, because if we are sweating a lot, then we're losing a lot of those valuable electrolytes, which are super important for our nervous system, so therefore our brain and how we think. And then sleep, which is obviously really hard, but making sure as we can to have good sleep hygiene. So making sure that we're wearing breathable fabrics, that the room is dark, that it's quiet. I've actually, now I wear, my husband calls it my raccoon mask. And because we had a puppy that made a lot of noise, I even put it's a treat. When I go to bed, I'm like, I don't want to hear or see anything. I just want to sleep. Just leave me alone. So I think really making peace with this, right? That we're no longer in our 20s and 30s and certain things wake me up. So now I just want to make sure I sleep well.
Making small changes today, and as you notice
Exactly.
things, will just help you
Yeah.
as you go
It's,
along.
and
Yeah.
so it's not to take all of these at once. It's just to think, okay, what one thing could I possibly do that might just help me? Maybe it's just having an extra glass of water first thing in the morning. Maybe it's swapping out that snack bar that you thought was really good for you for an apple and some nuts, right? Which will actually work out cheaper in the long run. Those little things can have huge impacts, and people always think it needs to be big, but it really doesn't.
Yeah. Excellent. And you actually have some of this information
Yes,
on
I'm
a
going to drop,
PDF that
yeah,
you're going to put a
put it
link
in the
to in the
details below. Apologies for those who are very tech. We're still learning. Yeah, I'm going to attach it in the description of the video. There'll be a small document for those that want to read it with just a little bit more information.
Perfect.
There we are.
So, if you have anybody that you think might find some of this information useful, we'd love it if you pass it on. Like it, make comments if you're interested, and if you have any other topics, we're always looking for topics.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
if you have something that's coming up for you and you want to have a conversation about it, please let us know. Reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. All of our information is in the description. And we hope you have a great rest of your day.
And we'll see you next time for some more Life's Nuggets.
Sounds good. Bye, everybody.
Bye.